given a really clear picture of who you're working with and how they've been impacted, little children, elementary school children, impacted by residential school today. What do you think can be done to break that cycle?
People need to be educated on the history of Aboriginal people. They need to understand that they aren't just alcoholics and drug addicts who are uneducated, that there's a reason for that the abuse and negligence that they suffered in residential school is a direct effect of what they're going through today. And if that's all they know, that's all they can teach their children. That's the only tools they have to pass on. And when you've been shown neglect, and you teach that to your children, that's all your children know. And your children teach neglect to their children.
So, in terms of this outline, I think you've covered everything, but can you just give yourself a minute just to think about what we've talked about, what you've been telling me, and if there's anything you want to add in any area? This is a chance, and then it'll just be put wherever it fits best.
The only thing I can think of would be if we begin at young ages teaching Aboriginal children about their culture, to be proud of it, and to teach them about residential school and that it wasn't anybody's fault. It wasn't their parents' fault or their grandparents' fault, that perhaps they don't have the education or the employment or the tools to be a good parent, that they can change it on their own, that they can become educated and realize why things happen and how they can prevent it. And by building on their culture, we can build their self-esteem and show them different ways on dealing with their emotions and not leading to drug abuse and alcohol abuse, and dealing with things using words and communication and emotions, and recognizing that it's okay to use those in order to pass whatever situation it is that they're dealing with. I just never was taught to have goals growing up. And I thought of wishes, perhaps, that, I wish to live in a better home. I wish to have money. And I asked what she meant by goals. My parents had never given me goals. And she said, goals, like, well, you didn't finish high school. That could be a goal. And I said, well, yeah, it could be a goal. And she said, okay, well, let's do 3 goals. And I'm going to take this piece of paper and I'm going to come back with it in about a year. So we wrote down on a piece of paper that I was going to finish school. My next goal was that I was going to move out of the building I was in and live in a better neighborhood. And my third goal is that I was going to get a better job and get myself off social assistance. And she took that piece of paper and I never seen it again. I never put much thought into that piece of paper. And a year later, she came to my house with this piece of paper and she said, I just want you to look at this. And I grabbed the paper and I looked at it, and then I looked at her and I smiled and I said, this was my goal sheet. And she said, yeah, what do you think about it? I said, I finished everything on that sheet without even knowing it.
Yeah. And that's when you were 21?
I was 21 when I did the goals. At 21 years old, I didn't know what a goal was, and I didn't know how to get there.
Yeah. You're making me think, too, of something that I talk about sometimes. Being in a 12-step program, that first step, your life is unmanageable. That has been so hard at different parts of my life, because I'm like, are you kidding me? I went to school. I go to work. I don't use alcohol or drugs anymore. I'm not fighting for my life every day. I'm probably not going to be killed today by a family member. My life is not unmanageable. And that's kind of what you're talking about there. If the expectations were so low,
or when there's no expectation.
Yeah, there's just nothing there. Yeah. Why would you think of trying to do more?
Yeah. I was actually, neither of my parents were on social assistance. They worked, they had good jobs. And so when I got on social assistance, it wasn't a pattern that I was following, that I had grown up with. Mm-hmm. It was something I fell into with the crowd that I was hanging out with. they didn't have high school, they didn't have a job, and they resulted to social assistance. And when I was on social assistance and then had my son, I then realized that I was given the same amount of money as a mother with a healthy child, and my child was so high needs that the formula he was on would take up my grocery money and would leave me with nothing. And that's where I became resourceful, that I was put my pride aside, and I'd go get those vouchers, and I'd go get food boxes from Salvation Army and whatever was available for me. And social assistants told me that they would never cut me off because of my son's disability, but I didn't want to live month by month. I needed more than that. And they let me go into a program called BC Works that moved me into my first job, and that job moved me to my second job. And when it was my second job is when my son became very ill and spent a lot of time in the hospital. I took a medical leave from work and never returned. And I spent time at home with him, went back on social assistance again. I felt like I took some steps backwards, and I didn't want to go to work. I didn't want to go to work and have to disappoint somebody that I was going to continue phoning in because my son was so sick. And it was then that I decided I would use my status to put me through school. So they would pay for my tuition. They would pay for my cost of living. That alone was more than I was getting on social assistance. And whenever my son was sick, I would never have to call into my teacher to have somebody replace me. And it was school that was my savior through all of it, because then I could go to school over and over and over again without having to worry about the money, about not being able to go anywhere, moving forward in my life. And it was once I was in school that I realized I was smarter than I thought I was. I had better grades than I did in elementary and high school, because I was doing it because I wanted to learn, not because somebody was making me go to school.
I just, the other day I noticed your tattoos, and I just noticed one when you're just moving your arm. And other people have talked about values, Aboriginal values, as one of the ways of breaking the cycles. Are both of them, do they have something to do with your really core values in your life?
Yes, I got patience and strength on my arms a few years ago, because those were two things that I wasn't really taught as a child. I wasn't taught how to be patient and what I could gain from being patient, and inner strength. I was never given reasons to be strong, and not strong meaning that I could fight or stand up for myself, but strong within myself to be confident in whatever decisions I made, that I could take responsibility for whatever consequences my actions left me with. And I had these because when my son was born with cerebral palsy, it took a lot of patience and inner strength to believe in myself that I could move forward through this, that it wasn't going to be a burden in our life, and that it was going to be a positive outcome, and it was. And these two tattoos remind me every day of where I've been and how I've gotten there.